My name is William. I'm here to do a tutorial as it pertains to the flute, and I'm trying to the Native American flute to be specific. Um, there's a Native American style flute and Native American flute. They are the same exact flute as far as how they're put together. The difference between the two is the Native American flute is made by a registered tribal member, recognized tribe. Native American style flute is the same flute made by a non tribal member. So, when referring to a flute, I can call it a Native American flute and I'm fine, but I do not claim to be registered recognized tribal member. So my flutes that I make are Native American style flutes, but to refer to the Native American flute is not a violation of a law as I understand it. But at any rate, getting that disclaimer aside, I may refer to the Native American flute, I may refer to it as a Native American style flute. Same thing. So, so let's I guess the thing I would say at this point is you kind of want to, unless you know music theory already, you kind of want to just erase your conceptions about things. Um, there is a thing that beginning flute players are told, and that is that because the flute is tuned to a minor pentatonic scale, as long as you play that scale, you can't play a wrong note. And that's absolutely true, unless you are playing with someone and they're playing in a key that's not consistent with the flute that you're playing. And it can be a simple matter as playing at a G major 7. You don't want to play a G minor flute with it. Uh, there are some notes in there. I mean, you can play anything you want, but some notes don't sound real good across that kind of a backdrop. So it's like colors. You can have a red that looks real nice, but you put it up against a yellow and the red looks different. Same with sound. You can have a nice melody on your flute, sounds real good, but you put a chord behind it and all of a sudden there's a problem. So it is true, if you're playing solo, you can play any note you want. If you're playing in a key that is consistent with the flute, you can play any note you want. But you have to be aware that there are some keys that you play that minor pentatonic and it ain't going to sound any good. So you can't just turn a deaf ear when you're playing the flute. You do have to pay attention, but when you're starting out and learning, you know, follow that rule. Any note is fine. There's no problem with that at all. But as you advance and you start playing with other musicians, guitarists, keyboard players, etc., you will find out that that rule is not always true. So, having said all of that, let's get started. The Western music that is made up of a 12-tone scale, and it's using an alphabetized or an alphabetical type system. Um, you can start with A or and go to G, however you want to start. But for everything that I'm going to talk about today, we're going to talk about it in the key of C because there are no flats and sharps. I don't want to complicate what is a fairly simple topic. I don't want to complicate it by getting into the sharps and when is it a sharp, when is it a flat. I don't want to get into all of that. I just want to talk about the major scale for the sake of simplicity. So the scale starting on C for the key of C major is C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, A sharp, B, and C. And I guess the first thing most people ask is whatever happened to E sharp and where's B sharp? Well, they don't exist. And I am not sure why it was done that way, but I think I have an idea. So I'll elaborate a bit on this here. There's 12 tones. This is the 13th, which is the octave, but there's 12 tones counting up to the B. So each of those changes from this note to this note to this note is called an interval. And if you call them tones, two changes or two frets on a guitar or two keys on a piano, two changes is called a tone or a step. One change is called a semitone or a half step. There might be other terms you guys use, but tone, semitone, step, and half step is what I use. So we have a half step, 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 half step, half step. They're all half steps. Okay, so you got what's called a chromatic scale, which means you're playing every note for the full octave. And I've charted out the finger diagram for I've got a high spirits C minor flute, and this plays a complete chromatic scale. And I make flutes, so I start counting hole 1 as the bottom hole. Some people say hole 1 is the top hole, but for me, it's number 1 on the bottom because that's the first hole I make when I'm drilling my holes on the flute and tuning it. So just as a demonstration, I'm going to play this chromatic scale on the C minor high spirits flute. And it may be wetted out because I've been practicing a little bit. So if it's wetted out, I'll apologize ahead of time for the squeaks. So I played from C chromatically all the way up to D sharp. I got to looking back and forth between monitors here, and I played a couple of notes the same note, and then I realized it, so I had to fix it. But the idea is that flute will play a completely chromatic scale. You can do the same thing on a 5-hole flute. It's just that when you get to where that fourth hole is, it isn't there, so you have to do some cross fingering. And this chart uses cross fingering. And what I want to do is right now just take a minute and explain something to you about cross fingering. A lot of people, you say the word cross fingering and their eyes glaze over. It's just like, I don't even want to go there. All of that half-holing and all of that stuff, it's like some complicated beast that they just don't want to tackle it. But cross-fingering is about as simple as it gets. It's almost as simple. Actually, if you're playing the minor pentatonic and you're holding down the fourth hole, you are cross-fingering. So, but there's a rule there, and I want to show you. The first thing you do is you're half-holing right here to get these first two intervals. That's the only place you have to half-hole. If your flute won't play this one, any good flute will play this one for sure, and a lot of them will play this one. So you don't have to do any half-holing beyond those two notes right there. And so you only have to learn one half-hole and maybe one quarter hole if your flute will do it. So the rest of it does not require half-holing. So it's not like you got to do a whole lot of elaborate half-holing. Some guys play that way, but you don't need to. So I want to look at cross-fingering, and I want to show you how simple it is. This is the first one where we have a complete hole open. There's no place you can cross-finger, because if you close it down, you're just back to the root note. Now, if you open the next hole, that's this one, F. Okay? So if you look at, you got two holes that are open here. If you close this hole, all you're playing is the D sharp that you've already played. So the only hole you can put down to cross finger is the bottom hole. And that's where the E is right there on a C minor flute. So if you notice, I opened a hole and covered the one right below it. Okay, so now we open that hole, we go to the next one. Now we're going to go to the next one, a half step up. So a whole step up goes to G, but we open a hole and close the one below it. That's the F sharp. Now we open that hole and we have the G. So what's the next one? We're going to open this hole and close the one below it. Then we're going to open that one. Then we're going to open the second or the fifth hole here and close the one below it. Okay, easy enough stuff. Now we open that one, we have the B. Now we open all the holes, but because we're on a 6 hole, we cover that one. Now we've got the whole scale. So cross fingering, a very simple rule. When you open a hole, if you want the half step lower or the one that's in between the other one that you just played, you open the hole and cover the one below it. That's all there is to get a half step. If you're on an F and you want to play an F sharp, think G with skip a hole and cover it. That's F sharp. Simple as, there's only one rule to remember. Skip a hole. Cover that hole, and now you have cross-fingered and you've got your half step. That is not complicated. And some people would look at it that way, like you've got all of these different finger patterns. All you're doing is opening from the bottom to the top like they teach you when you first start. But if you want the half step, you take the lowest close hole, you skip a hole and cover the next one. End of it. That's it. I mean, that's as hard as it gets. So let's move back to the scales now. We're looking at a C major scale. So the pattern for that is whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, half step. So it's 2 whole steps, 1 half step, and then 3 whole steps, and then 1. So if I were to say in basic interval numbers, we have 2, we're changing 2 notes, we're going up 2 notes, we're going up 1 note. So it would be 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 1. So that's how you remember the scale. It's 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 1. It's not C, D, E, F, G. It's 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 1. And that's intervals. So on your flute, this is the bottom. So 2 would be this one. 2 would be this one. 1 would be this one. 2, 2, 2, 1, 2. And so that's how you play it. You can look and say, okay, I want to memorize these notes. Well, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. Great. Now what happens when you get on a G flute? Now you got to transpose. The G, the second note would be A sharp. It's like, well, wait a minute. There aren't no sharps in the major scale. Well, I'll talk about that real quick. If you look at the pattern here, the interval pattern I told you, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, right? So now let's start on G. We just moved this whole scale down and started on G. So we got G, A, so we're going whole, whole, B, half step, C, whole step, D, whole step, E, whole step, F sharp. Whoa. So that's where your sharps and flats start coming in. When you get out of the key of C, you're following a pattern to play a major scale. You're not following a note sequence. You're following a pattern of intervals. And so it can get real complicated real fast, and that's not the scope of where I'm going today. All I'm talking about today is how to find your way around on the flute. And figure out how to play the thing without having to worry about all the transpositions and all of that stuff that a person might do. So there is a thing called modes. And the minor pentatonic scale that the Native American flute is tuned to happens to be a shortened version of the Aeolian mode. And it's just using 5 notes instead of all 7. So I want to talk a little bit about the modes today and see if I can get that part going for you and show you. Sometimes you might want to play a song in D minor, and you can use your C flute to do that. You can use your G flute to do that. I want to talk about that and when and why you might want to use a different flute, but you still kind of have to know the modes if you're going to play major and minor and on different flutes in different keys. It seems complicated, but it really isn't. I want to try and show you this stuff just as succinctly as I can here. Ionian is scale, it's the major scale. So if you know the C major scale, and it's just alphabetical, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, that is the Ionian mode. The Dorian mode, all that is, if you give a number to each one of these notes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then the octave. That D would be 2, F would be 4, G is 5, so forth. Those are called scale degrees. So to get the modes, there's 7 modes for the major scale because there's 7 notes in the scale. The Dorian mode is simply starting on the 2nd degree. So Dorian is D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D. The Phrygian mode is E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E. And right on down, Lydian, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F. So the modes is simply the C major scale starting on one of the degrees and playing up to that degree, 1 octave. So it's really not complicated to figure out what the modes are. Applying the modes is where it gets a little complicated. And the reason is, if you've got a C major scale and you start on C and play the major scale, you're fine. If you start on D, but your chord stays on C, you're still playing C major scale, whether you started on D or not. D is a minor, the Dorian mode is minor, and there's a chord assigned with each one of these notes. And I'm not going to go into chord theory today, but D is minor, E is a minor, F is a major, G is a major, A is a minor, and B is a diminished chord. So if you're playing in Dorian, you're playing in a minor mode. And it becomes real important what chord is being used behind what you're playing. And, that's why I started out saying you can play any note you want as long as the chords that behind it, if other musicians are playing with you, those chords have got to be consistent with what you're playing. Or you got to play consistently with what they're playing, one way or the other. So we've got these modes, and all they really are is interval patterns. It's like, how do I memorize Dorian? Well, it's D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D. But what if you're in the key of G where it's got an F sharp? Now how do you play Dorian? It starts getting complicated. So what you do is you don't think about the letters. You think about numbers and steps and intervals. So this is a chart that I've made, and it's showing the 7 modes. It's Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, and Locrian. So if you take a look here, we've got that pattern, the Ionian. It's whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Or 2 semitones, 1, 2, 2, 2, and 2. So we have 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 1. That's how I remember it. 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 1. 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 1. So whatever my root note is, maybe I'm on an F sharp flute. I don't think F sharp A, I think step and a half. I'm going from a root up 2. So not step and a half because I'm not playing a minor scale, but my second note is 2 semitones up. My third note is 2 semitones up from that. then a half step up from that. I'm not thinking F sharp, A, G, G sharp. I'm thinking 2-2-1, 2-2-2-1. And that's how I play music on any instrument I pick up. I play intervals. I don't worry about what the note is because there ain't time to think about A as an F sharp. If you're playing a major scale in the key of G, you can't think about that stuff. So now we got Dorian, starts on the second degree. The pattern is we're starting on a D note here, so it's a whole step up, E, half step up, F, whole step up, G, whole step A, whole step B, half step C, whole step D, you're back to the beginning. So you can memorize the notes or you can play the pattern. And all that happens whenever you go to a different mode is you're shifting the pattern. So if you notice, it's 2-2-1, 2-2-2-1, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Now we go to Dorian mode. It's 2-1, 2-2-2-1-2, or starting here, 2-1, 2-2-2-1-2. All we've done is shifted it by one. Phrygian's the same way. It's shifted by one. Now it's 1-2-2-2-1-2-2. Then it's 2-2-2-1-2-2-1. Then it's 2-2-1-2-2-1-2. 2-1-2-2-1-2-2. So the intervals are changing, and that's what I was telling you at the beginning. There's those half steps in there. Those ones, those half steps, those are the ones. They're in a different place on each mode. I'm always playing the C major scale as far as the actual notes I'm playing, but where that half step is depends on where I start in that scale, that major scale. So it's kind of hard. Some people have a hard time getting their head around that, but I can't stress enough that you have to stop thinking about the notes and think about the intervals. Then modes become real simple. And somebody says, well, I think I understand that, but how in the world do I do that in real life? What if I'm in the key of A sharp and I want to play the Dorian mode? What in the world do I do with that? How do I figure out which major scale to use? Because I'm no longer in C, I'm in A sharp, so I'm going to play A sharp Dorian. What in the world do I do with that? So I'm going to take a little bit of time and explain that. And then I think I'll call it good on this lesson, because it can get real complicated real fast, but the nitty-gritty that enables you to do your job as a musician is right in what I'm teaching here today. So which flute do I play? So you've got these modes. Ionian start on a C, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, and the patterns over there. You can see that. So you can hit pause to study this. Dorian start on D, so you got D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D. There's your pattern. Oh, so you got all these. Now you can memorize all of these patterns, and you can memorize the note names and all of that. So you got two ways to remember all this. You can do one of two ways. Memorize every mode pattern on your flute. You can do that. Or, number two, you can learn how to figure it out quickly. And I choose number two. So method one speaks for itself. You memorize every pattern on your flute. And you might want to play a given pattern in G on a G flute. You might want to switch to an A flute and play the same pattern to play that mode in that key. I mean, you can switch flutes and play the same pattern, or you can switch patterns on the same flute. Either way you want to do it. A lot of it's just practice, just regular old hard work practice. So I'm going to tell you how to figure out which key you want to use. Let's see if I can zoom this in a little bit here. There we go. So let's just make one up here. Let's say I'm going to play in the key of B, and I want to play Mixolydian scale. So how do I figure out which major scale I want to play? So that is the question. So How do I figure that out? Okay, so first off, you say mixolydian. So where is mixolydian? Where is that in the scheme of things? Well, mixolydian is the fifth degree of the major scale. So if we find mixolydian, and in our chart here, we have a G. Is that right? Okay, so now we're going to go G. We're going to go backwards. Or we can start on the root and count up. 1, 2, 3, 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So G is the fifth degree of the key of C. So you could count backwards. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you've got C. Is that right? So if I wanted to play G mixolydian, I would play a C major scale. So I'm on B now. So how do I figure out which scale to play? Well, if I were going to play B mixolydian, I would say, okay, I'm on the key of B. I'm going to count back from the fifth degree to the first degree. 1, 2, 3, or 1 is where you start counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I'm going to play C or an E major scale. So to play mixolydian in the key of B, you pull out your E flute and play a major scale. Or you can pull out your G flute and find where the E note is and start playing your E major scale on your G flute. It doesn't matter what flute you pick up. You just need to know where to start that major scale, and you need to know those intervals. Otherwise, you've got a spider web of trying to figure out, well, let's see now, I'm in a B flute, and B goes up to a D for the second note on the pentatonic scale, but I've gone to a G flute, and now that becomes an A sharp, but I'm playing an E major. I mean, it just gets, it would make me crazy. So it's a pretty simple process. What key are you playing in? I'm playing in G, so count back. If you're going to play mixolydian, count back, and you wind up, you need a C major scale on whatever flute you're going to play. It's easiest to pick up a C flute and play the major scale on the C flute. That becomes mixolydian. Okay. Yeah, I don't know any other ways to say that. If I'm in the key of A, I'm going to count back 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to pick up my D flute and play a major scale starting on the root note D, play a major scale, and that makes me playing in A mixolydian. If I were in, let's say I wanted to play F Lydian. Okay, so I'm going to start Lydian on F. So that's what? That's the fourth degree. So if you count back 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, to play Lydian, I would play the C major scale, but I would start on F. Or I could get an F flute and play C major scale. However you want to go at it, but you're going to use a C major scale. If I'm playing Lydian on an A flute, I'm going to play 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to play an E flute and play a major scale on the E flute, and that puts it in that mode. So I hope that made sense to you. And then there's one other thing I want to touch on before I close. I get long-winded, but I want to touch on this because I see it all the time. There's a thing called relative minor and relative major. A minor is a relative, it's the relative minor of C major. Or you could say C major is the relative major of A minor. So the upshot of that is, if you're playing an A minor flute, you're playing a C major scale. It's both pentatonic, but you're also playing F sharp, A minor and C, those are the same scale. Whether it be a pentatonic or a full Aeolian or natural minor, they are the same scale. So if you're playing an A minor flute, you can play in the key of C. Or you can play in a key of A minor. But the converse is also true. If you've got a C flute, you can play a C major scale on your C flute and you're playing an A minor. So I don't know if that made sense to you or not. If a C major and an A minor scale are the same, you can play A minor on either an A minor flute or a C major. On a C minor flute, play the major scale. So major minor, that relationship is the same whether you're on an A minor flute or a C minor flute. So I hope all of this made some kind of sense to you. Sometimes you might have to start back through it and look at it again and try it out yourself and all of that. But once the concept sinks in, your flute playing takes on a whole new dimension. It opens up horizons. You're breaking out of that minor pentatonic mode. There's so much more to be done than just the minor pentatonic mode. And I hope this kind of gets you on the pathway to that. If not, I'm happy to answer questions. If something I said is confusing, I'll be happy to answer questions. You can private message me. Or if the forum that you're on permits it, you can just ask the question. I can just reply right there on the forum. Anyway, I'm willing to answer questions if I've raised any. With that, thanks for watching and happy fluting.